Hi, this part of the video is the last section for the real numbers topic, which deals with scales and simple math problems. So the important things to note are scale drawing, scale factor, and area factor. So just as a refresh or recap, can you attempt like exercise 0? So converting the following quantities to centimeters. So from meters and kilometers to centimeters. So to understand scale factor, scales are used for maps and plans to represent real distances on the ground to what then it would scale to on paper. Since if you have a road for planning purposes or for building purposes or for construction purposes, which is maybe 5 kilometers, you can't then have a plan on paper which is 5 kilometers. So you need to know what then a certain distance on paper represents on the actual ground. For example, if the scale usually it's given in the ratio form 1:n, where n is the particular distance on the ground. So n would, let's say 1 would be the paper is to the actual paper or map, whichever one it is. For example, if the scale is 5 centimeters to 1 kilometer, it means that 5 centimeters on the map represents 1 kilometer on the ground. And if you need to convert that to 1:n, you have 5 centimeters is to 1 kilometer. The first thing you have to do is to change kilometers to centimeters. So kilometers, centimeters, I suppose it's easier by first knowing that 1 kilometer to centimeters. So first you can change to meters. So 1 kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters. But then 1 meter is 100 centimeters. Therefore, 1 kilometer will be equal to 100 times 1,000, right, in centimeters. So that's how you end up with 5 centimeters representing 100,000 centimeters. On the actual ground. Then you divide both sides by 5, and then you're left with 1:20,000. That's how you usually have it on the map. So now we have this example represent each of the following scales in the form 1:n. So the first one, we have 1 centimeter to 5 kilometers. So that means 1 centimeter on paper or on the map represents 5 kilometers on the ground or in reality. So in the format, that will be 1 centimeter is to 5 kilometers. Then the first thing we do is to convert kilometers to centimeters. All right. So I would say we know that so for me it's easier to understand if you convert to meters than to centimeters. So usually it's kilometers to meters, then from meters to centimeters. That's easier to understand. So we have knowing that 1 kilometer converts to 1,000 meters, because kilo means 1,000, right? What about 5 kilometers in proportion? That means more, right? So then we invert, it becomes 5/1 times 1,000, and this then becomes 5,000 meters. Then we go to so this is just the first part. So this was just the first part, and now we're going for the second part, converting to centimeters. So we know that 1 meter represents 100 centimeters, right? What about 5,000 meters? That's going to be more, right? So I'm just going to add a demarcation. So then that becomes 5,000 over 1 times 100. And then that becomes 500,000 centimeters. So going back to the scale, we had 1 centimeter is to 5 kilometers. And we know now that 5 kilometers is 500,000 centimeters. So now, since the units are the same, we don't have to repeat them. So 1 is to 500,000 is the answer. So that's how it would be like on the scale. Then the next part, we have 4 centimeters is to 1 kilometer. Again, convert kilometers to meters and then to centimeters so that we have the same units. So the first part, to meters, we know that 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters, which is easy, really. So then that's just going to be equal to 1,000 meters. And then the next part is 2 centimeters. We know that 1 meter is 100 centimeters. So this is at least something that the baseline that we know. Now we have to find out what 1,000 meters should be in centimeters. So by proportion, it should be more. So we're saying if 1 meter is 100 centimeters, if we have 1,000 meters, we're expecting more, right? Because it's much, much greater than 1 meter. So then we invert, it's going to be 1,000 over 1 times 100, which gives us 100,000 centimeters. And now we go to the scale. We go back to the scale since we've converted to centimeters. So our scale was 4 centimeters is to 1 kilometer. And that translated to 4 centimeters is to 100,000 centimeters. Okay, since now we have centimeters on both sides, we can leave out the units. 4 is to 100,000, and then we divide both sides by 4. 4 into 4, 1. 4 into 4, 1. 4 into 10, that's 2. And then 2. 4 into 20, that's 5. And then 0, 0. And then it becomes 1 is to 25,000. And that's the scale that we have. And then the next part is 2 centimeters is 3.4 kilometers. So as we've done before, convert kilometers to centimeters, but first via meters. So we have 1 kilometer is to 1,000 meters, and 3.4 kilometers, we're going to expect more. And to calculate that more, it's going to be 3.4 over 1 times 1,000, which becomes 3,400. And then in centimeters, knowing that 1 meter is going to be 100 centimeters. Then 3,400 meters is going to be something more. Again, invert that such that we end up having 340,000 centimeters. And then the next bit is the scale itself, because what we started with is 2 centimeters is representing 3.4 kilometers in reality. So we still have 2 centimeters. Now 3.4 kilometers in centimeters is the same as 340,000 centimeters. So again, 2 is 2, 3, 4, 340,000. Divide both sides by 2, such that we get 1 is to 170,000 is our scale. There we go. And then the next one is 3 centimeters to 6 meters. So it's 3 centimeters is to 6 meters. So we have to convert 6 meters to centimeters. Again, knowing that 1 meter is 100 centimeters, we are trying to find what 6 meters would be. And 6 meters is more than 1 meter, so then we expect more centimeters out of 6 meters. So that's going to be 6 over 1 times 100, which will give us 600 centimeters. And now for the scale, we have 3 centimeters is to 6 meters is the same as saying 3 is to 600. Divide both sides by 3. We end up with 1 is to 200. And yeah, so that's basically how you do it. I will not do the rest, but that's the general format, just knowing that you convert to the same units first, and then after that you divide. If the one on the left hand side is not a 1, you divide both sides by that, such that you have 1 is to something. So if you could try exercise 1, which is expressing the following scales in the form 1 is to n, and it's 6 questions, so you can take a screenshot and give those a try. So the next example, it's almost the same as what we've been doing. It says the scale on the map is 25 centimeters to 2 kilometers. Express this in the form 1 is to n. So again, you convert kilometers to centimeters, right? So you have 2 kilometers. After the computations, you're going to end up with 200,000 centimeters if you follow what we were doing before. And then next thing will be the scale, which is 25 is to 200,000. Then you divide both sides by 25, so that you're left with 1 on the left hand side. Then it becomes 1 is to 8,000. And then this question says that the RF of a map is given as 1:15,000. Find the map distance between 2 points which are 750 meters apart on the ground. So we know that for every 1 centimeter on the map, it's 15,000 on the ground, right? So now if we look at it like, so this is A, we're being asked to find the map distance, right? Given the distance on the ground. So we have the real distance and the map distance. The scale tells us that when the real distance is 15,000, the map distance is going to be 1 centimeter. What about when we have a real distance of 750 meters? What is the map distance, right? So the first thing we have to do is to convert meters to centimeters. So we have 750 meters to centimeters. That's going to be multiplied by 100, which is going to be 75,000 centimeters. So now we go back to this, to the scale of what we have. So we know that the real and the map. On the real, when we have 15,000, on the map we have 1 centimeter. But now on the real ground we have 75,000. We now need to know what that's on the map, which is more, right? So we know that it's going to be 75,000 over 15,000 times 1. And then we divide 15 to 75, that's 5. So that's going to be 5 centimeters on the map. And then now it says the actual distance to the nearest kilometer between 2 points which are 5.7 centimeters apart on the map. So now we're given the distance on the map. And we need to find the distance on the ground. So part B. We know that according to scale, for every 1 centimeter on the map, the real distance is 15,000 centimeters. But now we need to know, so if something is 5.7 centimeters, what is it on the ground? That's going to be more, right? More than 15,000 because only 1 centimeter represented 15,000. But now we're 5.7 centimeters, so we expect to get more. So again, this is going to be 5.7 over 1 times 15,000, and then that's going to be 85,500 centimeters on the ground, right? But we were asked to give the answer in kilometers, actually to the nearest kilometer. So now converting to kilometers, we do centimeters to meters and then to kilometers. So firstly, 2 meters, we know that 100 centimeters is 1 meter. What about 85,500 centimeters? It's going to be more. So that's going to be 85,500 over 100 times 1. which will be equal to 855 meters. And the next part is 2 kilometers. And converting to kilometers, now that we know that 1,000 meters gives us 1 kilometer. When we have 855 meters, we're going to expect less because it's less than 1,000. So it's going to be 855 over 1,000 times 1, which will be equal to 0.855 kilometers. But the question says to the nearest kilometer, so we're looking at this number right here, which is greater than 5, so we round up, and that would be equal to about 1 kilometer when it's rounded up. So yeah. And then the next set of questions, the next set of the topic under area under scale is area factor. So finding scales but in the area sense. For example, you will be told that, oh, this area on the map is covered by this much square centimeters, but on the ground then it covers this much hectares or square kilometers or square meters. Excuse me. So yeah. So to find the area factor, you square the scale factor. So we have an example. A map is drawn to the scale 1:5,000. On the map, a village has an area of 6 centimeters squared. Find the true area of the village in hectares. Note that 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters. You might have to know this. I'm not sure if it's always given in an exam context, but it's something that you have to know or remember. So step 1 says, let's find the area factor, right? So we have the scale factor of 1 centimeter is 5,000 centimeters. So to find the area factor, we square both sides. So we're going to square here. At the same time, square the 5,000 as well. Because now we end up with something in square centimeters, which is an area format. And then this is going to be 25 million centimeters squared, because now even the units tell you that it's area, right? So you have to watch out for that. Then the next part says now we have to use the area factor to find the required proportion. So we were told that we know that 1 centimeter squared represents 25 million on real ground. And we need to find what 6 centimeters squared represents. So it's going to be more. So it's going to be 6 over 1 times 25 million. And that becomes 150 million centimeters squared. Now we have to convert to the required units. We were asked to give it in hectares. So again, hectares, knowing that 1 hectare is 10,000 meters squared, right? We need to know how many meters squared there are. We first need to convert to meters squared. Let's convert centimeters squared to meters squared, right? So again, knowing that 100 centimeters is 1 meter, squaring both sides will give us the area equivalent in centimeters for 1 meter squared, right? Because now 1 meter squared will be equivalent to 10,000 centimeters squared. And we have, so if we know that 10,000 centimeters squared is equivalent to 1 meter squared. Then what about 150 million centimeters squared? That's going to give us more meter squared. It should be and that becomes 15,000 meters squared, right? Now we have to convert the meter squared to hectares. So we already know that 10,000 meters squared is 1 hectare. What about 15,000 meters squared? Then we're expecting more hectares. So we invert 15,000 over 10,000 times 1 such that our final answer is 1.5 hectares, and that is the area. The next question says the scale of a map is given as 1:250,000. Find A, the distance on the ground in kilometers represented by the length of 5 centimeters on the map. So again, we want the distance on the ground. We're given the one on the map. So we have our map and real, right? 1:250,000. But now we have a distance of 5 on the map, and we need to know what this is on the real ground. Again, proportion, it's going to be 5 over 1 times 250,000. And then it's going to be 1,250,000, right? Centimeters. But we were asked to give the answer in kilometers. So again, convert to kilometers. So it's centimeters to meters and then to kilometers. Unless if you know directly what 1 centimeter represents in kilometers, it might be easier to do it step by step. So again, knowing that 100 centimeters is to 1 meter, so then 250,000, it's going to be more. So that means 1,250,000 over 100 times 1. Sorry, over 100, not over 1,000. Then dividing, you get 12,500 meters. And then converting to kilometers, 1,000 meters go to 1 kilometer. What about when you have 12,500 meters? You're going to expect more kilometers. So that's going to be 12,500 divided by 1,000 times 1. And that should give you 12.5 kilometers is the final answer. So yeah. And then the next question says find the actual area in kilometers squared represented by an area of 6 centimeters squared on the map. So again, area factor, I will so first part is to find the area factor. So this is now for part B. We had, so for example, we know that 1 represents 250,000, right? Which was the same as 1 centimeter represents 2.5 kilometers if we change to kilometers. So areas factor, we square both sides, so it's going to be 1 centimeter squared is going to represent on the ground 2.5 kilometers squared, which is 1 centimeter squared represents 6.25 kilometers squared, right? And then now we are required to know the area of in kilometers squared for something on the map that's 6 centimeters squared. So now we have map and ground. For map areas, we know that 1 centimeter is going to be 6.25 kilometers squared. But now we are asked for something that's 6 centimeters squared, and we need to find out what that is on the ground. We expect it to be more because it's greater than the equivalent to 1 centimeter squared. 6 is greater than 1, so now it's going to be 6 over 1 times 6.25, right, kilometers squared, and then that becomes 37.5 kilometers squared. So there are many approaches to this, in that I converted the ground from centimeters to kilometers first. You can also leave it in centimeters, then compute everything, but now not that you'll be dealing with a very large number, and then still do the proportion, find the answer in centimeters squared, and then convert it to kilometers squared using unit conversion. But this was much easier and much simplified. So yeah, that's one approach you can use. So now you can do the questions in the following exercise. The first one is given a map of Harare that is drawn to a scale of 1 is to 50,000, and the airport covers area of 8 centimeters squared. Find the true area of the airport in hectares. So again, knowing what hectares represent. And then number 2, a sports stadium covers an area. Now you're given in hectares. You're given the one on the actual ground, and you're asked to find what it would be on the map when it's drawn to a scale of 1 is to 5,000. So yeah, do give it a try, and you can leave any questions that you have in the comment section or get in touch.